Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you are joining us from, again, whether you're in Connecticut, Minnesota, Florida, California, Colorado, Idaho, wherever it is, we're so glad that you joined us today. So, today we're going to continue moving through the Bible. Again, oftentimes we miss some of the deeper meanings when we just kind of read over the text. And so that's what we do here at Ethos. And so if you'd like to join us, hit that subscribe button, right? And if you want to continue to support what we're doing, we're going to give you some links below that you can help us financially continue this good work that we do. But all to say, we're so glad you're here joining us in this really in depth study over one of my favorite books, part of the Torah, Genesis. So before we step into this, I wanted to address one question that was asked about Easter. And so this is a really interesting one because last week we kind of delved, or a couple weeks ago we delved into this idea that maybe Easter is not about God demanding a sacrifice in order to be appeased, right? There's something so much richer, fuller going on there. And so we talked about that. But as this question comes up, many people, I've talked to so many people who the traditional version is kind of hard to kick because we have so many different verses that kind of we've heard them in certain ways, interpreted certain ways. It's very hard to step away from that traditional perspective that God needed a sacrifice, so Jesus took on the wrath of God. Now that sacrifice covers us all, and now we're good, right? Yeah. So let's delve into it. Here's the verse, and I know many of you have heard it. The question was, how do we interpret 1 John 2, verse 2? So, what is 1 John 2, verse 2 for some of you that don't know? Here it is. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate before the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He himself is the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not only for our sins, but also the sins of the whole world. So let's address one thing right from the get-go. So important to understand context, and that's why I added the extra verse there to show above what's going on here. So understand this. First off, what does it mean to sin? Super, super important here because I think many of us, we've bought into Augustine's idea that we are born evil, inherently bad, we're sinful. But again, that is ridiculous when we begin to understand humanity. Anyone who's ever had a kid, as a child, these kids are innocent. When they make little mistakes when they're babies, it's not that they're bad. They're not touching the pot because they think, "Ooh, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to burn my hand." No, they're learning, right? Their prefrontal cortex is beginning to build, and they're making these connections in their brain. We're not born inherently bad. No, we learn, we change, we shift, we grow. And so to sin, the actual word here, it's an archery term. And so again, you pull the arrow up and you aim and you do your best to shoot the target. And let's be honest, many times we miss, right? We're doing our best and many times we miss. Sometimes we are so far off, right? Sometimes we think the thing that's going to bring us life actually brings us closer to death. And so we have these degrees of sin, right? These degrees of missing. But this idea that if anyone sin, we have an advocate. Well, here's the thing: we're all missing, right? We're all missing, and sometimes we're hitting. Sometimes we hit the target right on. The idea of sin needs to be shifted a bit back to what it meant in the beginning. So that is the concept of sin. So understanding that changes this even a little bit from the traditional perspective, how oftentimes Easter is associated with. Now, next, it's really important to understand the tradition of sacrifice, right? Every ancient tradition, well, not every, most ancient traditions, they had a ritual. And they would sacrifice animals, they would sacrifice birds, they would sacrifice humans, slaves, firstborns. Many of these tribes did this. And deep the heart of it was that many of them were scared. They felt like they needed to do certain things in order to get good crops that year. Where did the good crops come from? Well, many of them associated their gods blessing or cursing them, right? And so Israel followed in the footsteps of these traditions. Yeah. And so they would oftentimes feel guilty, right? They would feel guilty, pain, shame, whatever it was. And they would assume that their God was going to smite them or hurt their chances of having a good harvest that year. Israel fell prey to this. But here's the beautiful thing about Scripture, especially the Old Testament. What we see here is that the prophets are saying, hey, look, Israel, we don't follow in those footsteps. There's something so much deeper going on here. And so when you look at Micah 6:6, one of my favorite verses, for I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. There's a couple other places where God says, your burnt offerings, these sacrifices, it makes me sick. Because this is not about me, it's about you. It's not about me feeling good about you because I feel good about you. It's about you feeling good about you. So you don't need to do these things, right? You don't need to sacrifice. You don't need to kill children. You don't need to kill innocent lambs. I don't desire violence. That's always been you. Yeah, interesting context, right? Over and over again, you'll see this. Yes, Israel misunderstands their God over and over again. But there are the prophets who will bring them back. Look, it's not about sacrifice. It's about living the fullest life right here, right now. It's about learning how to love one another, acknowledge our God in our lives. That's the beauty. So going back to 1 John 2, 1 through 2, notice this. He himself is the atoning sacrifice. So many people during Easter, they get this idea of the atonement theory, right? This is what we call atonement theory. Jesus pays a price in order that we might live, right? So the question was, what happened before Jesus died then? And what happens after? How come there's still sin in the world if sin is some superfluous thing? Well, that's the point, right? The atonement, this idea of atonement, this idea that Jesus needed to die in order to pay some kind of price that God is setting. No, that was never even the point. Look at the original word here, hilamos. Hilamos means offering. It means this animal sacrificial thing that tribes did. It's what they did, right? It's not God asking for it. Jesus here, here's the thing, Jesus becomes this thing that the people are putting their hate, their anger, their guilt on. And God has said over and over again, I don't want the sacrifices. I don't need to be appeased. And yet over and over again, Israel puts their anger, their frustration, their pain, their guilt, their shame on something else. They don't deal with it themselves, right? So they put it on something else so that can just go away. And I think many times in our own lives, we do that, don't we? We'll find scapegoats, right? We'll find the scapegoat, the thing that if I just get angry enough, if I kick my dog, then I'll feel better. If I do this or this or this, I'll feel better. But at deep, the heart of it, if I do those things, I'm never really addressing the deeper issue. And so Jesus is in the middle of this interesting battle between basically the Romans and the Jews. And it's like a tinderbox, and they're both so angry, so much hate, so much violence. And it needs to go somewhere. And so Jesus takes the hate, the violence of these groups. And so who killed Jesus? Was it God saying, I demand a sacrifice, all of this? Was he the atonement? Well, first off, no atonement. That word doesn't even make sense when you put it in the actual context. Who killed Jesus? Well, the crowd did. Yeah, their need for vengeance, hate, division, anger, mob mentality, the riot, that is what killed Jesus. All the anger is placed on the one man, right? It's placed on Jesus. And we've seen this over and over again in our own culture. We're mad about certain things that happen. And so we must have death, death penalty, murder in the first degree, whatever it is. We have to put all that on that person. Then we feel better. And it's scapegoating, and it always creates victims. And so the idea here is Jesus becomes the whipping boy, the one murdered to satisfy not the Father, but the crowd's need for blood. And so understanding that verse in that context, yes, Jesus becomes the sacrificial whipping boy for the crowd. And so when it says the entire world for you and me, the idea, that was, first off, it wasn't even a reference for us thousands of years later. No, that was for the Jewish people. The Jewish people who had been demanding blood. The idea here is we don't need blood anymore. We don't need to rely on violence, beastly empire anymore. When Jesus died, we saw the fullness of the ugliness of what this of what needing the scapegoat, the demand for the scapegoat does to a culture. We saw that in the action of crucifying innocent Jesus on the cross. Yeah. And he again, of course, recycles that hate with love. And it is a beautiful, beautiful moment. I hope that helped interpret that verse a little bit deeper. So much depth to it, so much fullness. It's a beautiful verse when you understand the context. Now, we just spent a good amount of time on that, and you might want to replay that over and over again. There's a lot there. But I want to delve into Genesis a little bit. We're going to look at a couple more verses. So let's delve in. We always talk about Genesis. The context is so important, of course. Babylon, 587 BC. Torah is not written as a history book, right? It's not about literal history. It's about these individuals trying to keep their cultural values through story, through prophetic warnings, through prophetic musings. And so every time a new figure, a messianic character is brought in, we see Israel miniaturized. And so Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized through prophetic warnings, musings, mythology, poetry, song, all of that. So this is what Genesis is. And so in our chapter here, in chapter 13, we're introduced to Abraham and Lot. So again, Abraham, literally the founder of Israel. That's what his name means. Was his name actually Abraham, the founder of Israel? Well, I don't know. But again, the word actually just means founder. We probably wouldn't call, instead of calling George Washington founder, we would call him George Washington, right? I think you understand what I'm saying. Abraham is the founder of Israel. And so, what does the founder do? What direction does the founder set? Where do we go as a nation? This is the idea. So, Genesis 13, 7 through 12 is what we'll look at today. So, here we go. And there was a quarrel between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and between the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanites and the Perizzites were then dwelling in the land. And Abram said to Lot, please let there be no quarrel between me and between you and between my herdsmen and between your herdsmen, for we are kinsmen, right? We're family. It is not the land before you. Please part from me. If you go left, I'll go right. And if you go right, I'll go left. Continues. And Lot raised his eyes and he saw the entire plain of Jordan that was entirely watered before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you come to Zoar. And Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan, right? And Lot traveled from the east, and they parted from one another. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and he pitched his tents until Sodom. Okay, so here we go. Let's delve into this a little bit. So first off, and there was a quarrel between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and between the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. They're family. Why are they fighting? Funny question, because anyone who has a family knows families quarrel. But here's the deeper thing. During that time era, when you had two large groups of people who were both led by two different individuals, you were going to have some drama. And especially if you are farmers and herdsmen, there's going to be problems. At some point, your cattle is going to cross onto their land. It's going to eat some of their crops, some of their produce, and vice versa, right? This land is mine. Why are your sheep over here? This happened all the time. There were constantly wars being fought, mini wars, skirmishes being fought over land. And today we see that over and over again, don't we? We're about to get into a war with Syria is the rumor right now. Right? We get into wars, we want resources. It's what we do. It's what empires do. And so it's an interesting also moment where it's kind of a reference back to Cain and Abel, right? There's this cross, this moment where their nations, their people, their values cross over. And what do we do when the two different individuals don't agree? Well, oftentimes there's violence. And so, of course, there's violence, and yeah, what happens? How do we stop the violence? All of this is going to be had. But here's the bigger point: the two are wanting resources, right? They want the resources. They want to draw the line. They want to take, take, take. I want what you have. I want more, more, more. Yeah. Notice this. Israel has been given over and over again these commands that say, look, it's not about more. It's not about abundance. It's not about taking everything you can from everyone else. It's not about hoarding that power over others. That's actually a sign of weakness, according to Israel's prophetic warnings. According to their God, that's not a sign of strength. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of moving in the wrong direction. So look at this. Even for their kings, they made up certain rules for their kings, so that it would keep their kings, the leaders of their nation, to keep them on track, to keep them away from hoarding power, continuing to want more, more, more resources, right? Mine, mine, mine. They actually set rules in place for the kings. Notice this, Deuteronomy 17 through 18. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of livestock for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more for them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. When you begin to understand and research Solomon, he acquired tons of gold. In fact, the number is 666, right? Yeah, read it. Really fascinating stuff there. 666. When you begin to really delve into what happens there, you'll understand over and over again. Abraham, he's doing his best not to repeat these things. He's doing his best to bring Israel at this place where they're not moving into Egypt again, because they left Egypt, right? It's not about acquiring. It's about living differently. I find this interesting because oftentimes when we want more, it almost always leads to conflict. And so nation after nation, tribe after tribe, we get into these conflicts, these skirmishes, right? The herdsmen are fighting, and we call these wars. One of my favorite historians says this about war. War is politics by other means. In other words, when political leaders cannot get what they want through peaceful methods, they judge the cost of achieving their goal through military force. Notice this. They'll attempt peace, but if they don't get what they want, we immediately go to war. And we've seen this over and over again, right? If I can't get along with someone, if I can't get the resource I want, if they don't give me what I need, then violence takes place, doesn't it? Violence. The deeper issue, I like this quote, the deeper issues of countries that go to war is the heart of dissatisfaction. Never feeling satisfied with what we have. It's the need for more, more, more. When you personally, or as a nation, or a tribe, or people, when it's all about gaining more, larger empire, more resources, more military, when it's all about more, well, then here's the problem. You'll never have enough, will you? You'll never be at a place where you truly have enough, because there's never enough. When more is the theme that you're singing, right? It's the theme of your song. You'll never have enough. Deuteronomy 26 says this, and I find this quote really a fascinating one because it really hits at the heart of greed. But most people, when they read this seems like a very odd quote. It's a very odd thing, and most people don't get it until you understand the context. But it's really the heart of what we're talking about, greed. When I break for you the staff of bread, and 10 women will bake your bread in one oven, and they will bring back your bread by weight, and you will eat, yet not be satisfied. What does this mean? Staff of bread? Why are 10 women baking bread in one oven? Here's the idea here. The deeper picture here is the Jewish interpretation of this is pretty simple. It's a picture of what happens when we allow greed to move us. When greed is the engine behind our decisions. Greed. Someone taking too much and they're hoarding it over others. Right? I take it too much, and the bread, it basically, because I've taken it all to myself, I can't eat all of it. Just me, right? And so it becomes useless. It begins to go bad. it begins to go bad. And what's left are the little crumbs. And the crumbs will, of course, harden. It's tainted. This is the idea here. When it's all about more, 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 well, I get so much that actually becomes useless to me. It's wasted on me. And the people who actually need it don't get it. And this is what happens to an empire when it becomes all about me, me, me. We go to war, we take, take, take. And then the widow, the orphan, and the stranger within our gates gets nothing but crumbs. And even the crumbs, according to this verse here in Deuteronomy 26:26, even the crumbs are hard. Even the crumbs are worthless. This is what happens when greed, more, fighting over lines, territory, resources, never having enough. This is where this goes. And so Lot and Abraham's people, they begin fighting. They want more. Their cattle cross paths. They begin taking, no, that's my sheep. No, that's my sheep. You see where this goes. And so the story continues. Abram said to Lot, please let there be no quarrel between me and between you, and between my herdsmen and between your herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not all the land before you? Please part from me. You go left, I'll go right. Right? If you go right, I'll go left. Again, what a beautiful picture here. Two nations who do things differently, and that's okay. Two nations who are doing things differently. They said, look, that's your border. Here's our border. We're going to find a way to live in peace. We're going to do it differently, but we're going to find a way to respect one another and our resources. And if God forbid one of us needs help, we help the other. It's what we do. Yeah, beautiful picture, right? And Lot raised his eyes. He has a decision to make. Where do I want to take? What land do I want as mine? So Lot looks out, and he says he saw the entire plain of Jordan, and it was entirely watered. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah like the garden of the Lord and like the land of Egypt as you have come to Zor. Here's kind of fun, something interesting. When you think of Egypt and you watch like Prince of Egypt or you even just type Egypt, you'll see it looks like a desert, right? And we assume all these stories that, oh, Israel is in the desert and these pyramids, it's nothing but desert and sand and all this. No, during that time era, when Israel would have been there, when Abram would have been in Egypt, Egypt was actually a lush grassland. Egypt was plentiful. It had tons of resources. It's why their nation thrived. It was not a desert. It was full of abundance. And so when it says that it looked like Egypt, understand this, Sodom and Gomorrah, here's one historian. We know archaeologically Sodom and Gomorrah was a lush place, not a desert, but a bountiful grassland with plentiful resources. This was a good choice. Lot made a really good choice. He made probably the better choice when you look at it. It was so lush, so green, so good. Right? It's where you would want a nation because it's where the resources are. But notice this, there's one issue. There's one problem with Lot's decision. And again, it's metaphorical. Don't drop immediately to the literal. Look at the deeper issue. Lot traveled from the east. Notice this. He is traveling away from this idea of goodness, Eden, right? He's moving in the wrong direction. And so we see this over and over again in these different empires. Lot and his people, they will begin choosing the wrong direction. They'll begin moving toward the things that are bringing brokenness and pain. And that's the thing, like we talked about last week. What do you do with the gifts you have? Do you use them to better others or just yourself? And in doing so, do you get so much at the expense of others that the crumbs you're throwing away, bread, rotten bread, you're letting it mold at the expense of others who get nothing? That's what's happening with Lot and his people. And when you do that, according to this story, and we're going to find out more, you begin to become these people with no ethics, no values. You actually move away from Eden. And this is what Lot will do. They begin to move away. So you cannot have shalom built on a foundation that is beastly. You can't have shalom built on the back of slaves. You can't have shalom built on the back of taking bread from people who need it, only to eat just the crumbs and let the rest of it go bad. You cannot have shalom living that way. You just can't. And when you continue going down that road, you suffer personally. As a nation, everyone suffers. I love some of these quotes. What do we do with abundance? How do we learn how to give? What do we do as a nation? I love some of these quotes. The wicked borrows but does not pay back. But the righteous is generous and gives. Israel was learning this lesson. We must be generous. We must give. Beautiful. Here's more. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. Israel was learning to be a nation that continued to give, finding ways to help those in need. Beautiful. He who supplies seed to the sower and the bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. Notice that if we give, if we find ways to be generous, to love one another, to share of resources, when we do these kinds of things, it's like we're singing praises to our God in everything we do. Our values, our actions, it's like we're singing them. They're praises. In all things, I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So good. And I think most of us know that when you give, when you help others, you notice you get this feeling, these endorphins kick in because you know you did something meaningful. That's what happens when you give, when you are generous. Do not neglect to do good and share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Israel is learning in this moment. Abraham, what is he going to do with his resources? We'll find out. But Lot, unfortunately, he goes the wrong direction. He begins to build his empire on me, more. And we're going to see how that continues to bring brokenness and pain. Abraham and his people, they choose to be generous, to give, and it causes them to thrive as a nation. Generosity is key for Israel to become a great nation. And I would argue generosity is key for you and me as just individuals to continue living and thriving today and as a nation. So what do we do? How do we take it home? Well, here's the thing. How do we become a generous person? Number one, consider the benefits of generosity. I think for many of us in our culture right now, we forget there's a benefit to it. We're always asking, what's in it for me? Let's start there, right? Let's just start there. What's in it for me? Well, generous people, we know this. They're happier, they're healthier, they're more satisfied than those people that don't give. And so what's in it for you? Let's just start there. Let's go there first. There's a lot in it for you. Happier, healthier, more satisfied. You get the endorphins pumping. There's something big in it for you. Now that we took care of the you, let's go deeper. How do we become generous? Maybe we start small, right? Start small. Make it a couple dollars here and there, right? Tipping your waitress or waiter, doing some of these things, making those regular actions. Give what you can. Start small. You don't have to start by saying, I'm gonna pay for this kid's way through college all the way. Whoa, that's a big commitment, right? Whatever it is, start small. And you'll find many people I know, as they begin to give, they find they have more and more to give. It's just amazing how it works. Number three, give first. When you receive the next paycheck, make it your first expense. I tell people all the time, think about giving to Ethos. Think about making a commitment to what we do here. And try to make us not your last thing on your list, right? Find ways to give to the things you know bring life. And instead of waiting till there's nothing left, if that's a priority to you, start first, right? Start first by giving to the things you know are bringing life. Be generous. Number four, spend time with people in need. Man, this is so good. How do you know what people need? How do you know who's in need, who's not in need, what they need? The only way to know this is to spend time with them. Yeah, spend time with them. I'll never forget in Orange County, I saw this guy in the street and he looked homeless. And so I actually stopped. I said, "Hey, can I get you? Can I give you a couple bucks or can I give you some food?" And he said, "Man, what I really need is some shoes." And think about it. I looked at his shoes. Oh yeah, his shoes are totally rotten. They're like his toes are sticking out. It just took a few minutes for me to talk to him to understand the guy needs shoes. He's getting 4+ meals a day there in Orange County, he told me. But he said he can't get a pair of shoes, and his feet are just killing him. So fascinating. Get to know the people that you're helping. And then lastly, spend time with generous people. If you want to take on a certain habit, then spend time with people who are already exhibiting that habit, who are already living the thing. If you want to be a generous person, spend time with other people who are being generous. Spend time with the good tippers. Spend time with the people who are constantly doing things for the community, and you will find it will rub off on you. And at some point, you will find others who are spending time with you will do the same. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. That was a lot of fun. That was just a couple verses, right? But there's so much depth in this book. As always, I want to remind you, we're talking about generosity today, right? Generosity. So if you want to give, continue helping support this, ethos-church.org/donate. Be generous today, right? Give what you can. Help support this ministry that we are doing on a weekly basis. We think it is helping people all over. Uh, Ethos Living Rooms, please continue to consider joining us as we have really in depth discussions. Let me know if you want to be a part of that. It is so much fun when we get these discussions going. And then lastly, hit that subscribe button. We need to share this with everyone we can. So begin sharing it. Hit subscribe. Let people know this is what we're doing. This is a really good study. Spread the word. Everyone, take care. We'll see you next week as we continue delving in to chapter 13 of Genesis. Take care. We'll see you